In the quiet countryside of occupied France, far from the noise of battle, German commanders believed they still controlled the fate of Europe. Massive stone chateaux housed war rooms where red and blue pins marked front lines that existed more on paper than in reality. The ticking of clocks echoed through halls, heavy with smoke and exhaustion. Inside these rooms, men who once planned lightning victories now studied maps with uncertainty. Telephones rang with reports they did not want to hear. Outside, the wind carried a warning. The storm they had feared was finally coming. Deep within concrete bunkers, orders traveled through cables and radio waves. Yet communication no longer meant control. On the coast of Normandy, Allied aircraft filled the skies. Warships lined the horizon. German officers listened as reports poured in, paratroopers landing, naval guns firing, beaches under attack. The invasion they had debated for months was no longer a theory. It was real, unstoppable, and already unfolding. The beaches of Normandy became scenes of chaos and sacrifice. Smoke covered the shoreline as men charged forward under relentless fire. German defenses, once considered unbreakable, began to fracture under sheer force and numbers. Far away, in mountain retreats and fortified headquarters, key decisions were delayed. Critical armored divisions remained idle. Time, the one resource Germany could not afford to lose, slipped away. As Allied forces pushed inland, German commanders argued, hesitated, and waited for permissions that never came. Tank divisions sat silent while the enemy advanced. In North Africa, one of Germany's most capable generals studied reports with growing concern. The war he once believed could be managed was now spiraling beyond control. Inside the Führer's bunker, anger replaced strategy. Voices rose, fists slammed against tables. Generals stood frozen, absorbing accusations they knew were meaningless. Communications failed. Radios crackled with static. Outside the bunkers, the sky belonged to the enemy. The illusion of control shattered piece by piece. Bombers crossed the clouds in endless formations. Below them, German supply depots vanished in fire and smoke. Roads turned into death traps. Soldiers ran for cover as explosions tore the ground apart. The machinery of war that once powered Germany's advance now burned in ruins. Medical tents overflowed. Ammunition burned uncontrollably. Reports confirmed what commanders feared. Retreats were becoming routes. Paper after paper delivered the same message. The front lines were collapsing faster than replacements could arrive. Convoys retreated through mud and rain. Artillery pieces were abandoned. Soldiers surrendered, their weapons falling into the dirt. Torn flags lay trampled under boots. The symbols of dominance that once inspired fear now represented defeat. Urban warfare replaced open field battles. Allied troops cleared ruined towns street by street. Every window could hide a rifle, every corner could explode. Grenades rolled across broken pavement. Machine guns echoed between shattered walls. Civilians hid beneath floors as entire neighborhoods collapsed above them. Tanks smashed through buildings. Anti-tank guns fired desperately. Smoke poured from steel hulls as crews fled burning vehicles. The war had entered its most brutal phase, close, chaotic, and unforgiving. Captured soldiers sat silently under guard. Allied command posts advanced forward, maps constantly redrawn as cities fell one by one. The direction of the war was no longer in doubt, only the cost remained unknown. Columns of Allied vehicles stretched beyond the horizon. German cities burned under night skies lit by flares and explosions. By morning, entire districts lay in ruins. The empire built on conquest was being erased block by block. Forests became battlegrounds, artillery ripped through trees, flamethrowers sealed bunkers that had once promised safety. Concrete cracked, steel bent. Soldiers fled through smoke, coughing and blinded, abandoning positions that could no longer be held. Captured bunkers became Allied strongpoints. Air superiority crushed every attempt at reinforcement. Roads filled with wreckage. The German army, once defined by speed and coordination, now moved in fragments, hunted from the air, broken on the ground. Engineers rebuilt bridges as tanks rolled forward without pause. Civilians fled with what little they could carry. The front moved relentlessly eastward. Germany itself was no longer a distant objective, it was the battlefield. City outskirts fell, street fighting intensified, smoke filled the sky. Retreating soldiers funneled toward city centers, chased by artillery and aircraft. What remained of the Third Reich was now cornered. Berlin came under constant bombardment. Buildings collapsed, underground shelters filled with civilians praying for survival. Inside ruined streets, teenagers and old men stood with rifles, facing seasoned armies. The final defense was built not on strategy, but desperation. Foreign soldiers advanced through the capital. Flags rose above ruins. Fires consumed landmarks once meant to last 1,000 years. Deep underground, the leadership sat in silence. Maps meant nothing now. The war had reached its end. Documents burned. Orders ceased. Doors closed. Outside, weapons were dropped. White flags waved through streets of rubble. Germany surrendered not with a final charge, but with exhaustion and collapse. Pens scratched across paper, ending the war in Europe. Prisoners marched away under guard. As the sun rose over shattered cities, the silence felt heavier than the explosions that came before. Helmets lay abandoned, rifles rusted where they fell. The war was over, leaving behind ruins, memories, and a lesson written in the ashes of an entire continent.
War in Europe did not end with a single explosion, a final speech, or a moment of triumph. It ended quietly, unevenly, across shattered cities and silent fields. The guns stopped firing not because hatred vanished, but because there was nothing left to destroy. What remained was rubble, exhaustion, and the irreversible realization that an entire continent had been pushed beyond its limits. For years, the conflict had consumed everything in its path: nations, families, ideals, and lives. It began with ambition and belief in absolute power, but it concluded in basements, bunkers, and broken streets. The same regime that once promised order and dominance collapsed under the weight of its own brutality and miscalculation. In the final days, there was no glory, only survival. Cities that once symbolized culture and progress were reduced to skeletal ruins. Roads were clogged, not with armies advancing, but with civilians fleeing. Children grew old too quickly. Soldiers no longer fought for victory, only for the hope of seeing another sunrise. The war had stripped everyone, victor and defeated alike, down to their most basic humanity. When surrender finally came, it arrived not as relief, but as shock. Many could not comprehend that the constant noise of artillery and aircraft was truly over. Silence felt unnatural, dangerous, as if the war might resume at any moment. For the soldiers who survived, the end of fighting did not mean peace. They carried the war with them, in their memories, in their wounds, and in the faces of those who did not return. Victory offered no answers to the questions that haunted them at night. It only confirmed the cost. For civilians, the aftermath was even harsher. Homes were gone. Families were torn apart. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but fear and loss. The rebuilding of cities would take years, but the rebuilding of lives would take far longer. Germany, once at the center of Europe's collapse, now stood defeated and divided. The ideology that fueled its rise lay exposed, hollow, destructive, and built on lies. The promise of a 1,000-year empire ended not with celebration, but with surrender documents signed in quiet rooms. Yet the end of Nazi Germany did not mark the end of suffering. Across Europe, millions were displaced. Camps were liberated, revealing crimes so vast that language itself struggled to describe them. Survivors emerged weakened but alive, carrying stories the world could never afford to forget. The war forced humanity to confront the darkest extremes of what organized violence could achieve. It demonstrated how easily fear could be weaponized, how quickly institutions could be turned toward destruction, and how silence and obedience could become tools of catastrophe. But it also revealed something else. In the ruins, people chose to rebuild. Former enemies stood side by side, clearing debris. Nations that had once clashed began searching for new ways to prevent such devastation from ever happening again. From the ashes of war emerged fragile but determined efforts towards cooperation, accountability, and remembrance. The conclusion of World War II reshaped the world in ways that still define the present. Borders changed, power shifted, new alliances formed. The war became a dividing line in history, a before and an after. Yet history does not end with dates or treaties. It continues through memory. Every abandoned helmet, every destroyed building, every name carved in stone stands as a reminder of what was lost. These are not symbols of victory or defeat. They are warnings. They tell us what happens when hatred is normalized, when truth is ignored, and when power goes unchecked. The silence that followed the war was not empty, it was heavy with responsibility. Responsibility to remember the victims, responsibility to confront uncomfortable truths, responsibility to ensure that such destruction is never accepted as inevitable. World War II ended, but its meaning is still being written, and it is up to us to decide whether history will repeat itself or finally be understood.